One of the greatest footballers ever, Diego Maradona, has died at the age of 60. The Argentine superstar is said to have suffered a heart attack. Maradona had struggled with substance abuse and ill health, but said playing football always gave him the greatest joy. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has written about the pain of her miscarriage in July of this year. She said losing a child means carrying an almost unbearable grief, experienced by many but talked about by few. The US President-elect Joe Biden will deliver a nationwide address a little later on the eve of Thanksgiving. He's expected to urge people to unite and to reassure all Americans they'll get through the coronavirus crisis together. And Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, has promised to restore order in the territory after describing it as a gaping hole in China's national security.
The Ethiopian government again warns people to flee the capital of the Tigray area as its forces prepare to launch an offensive against local leaders there. In the United States, a federal agency has cleared the way for President-elect Joe Biden to officially begin preparations to take office on January 20th. 5 professional basketball players from the U.S. joined a delegation that discussed social justice with Pope Francis at the Vatican Monday. And China has launched a robot spacecraft from Hainan Island aimed at bringing back rocks from the moon.
I'm Yoshio Gasawara. We start this hour here in Japan, where Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide has wrapped up a meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. It's the highest-level in-person meeting between the two countries since Suga took office in September. The pair met for about 20 minutes on Wednesday evening.
The two countries' relationship is crucial to the region and the international community. Japan and China should work together.
We thank the Prime Minister for your positive and diplomatic approach to China.
Suga reiterated calls for China to take positive steps involving maritime and security issues in the East China Sea, including waters around the Senkaku Islands. Japan controls the islands. The Japanese government maintains the islands are an inherent part of Japan's territory. China and Taiwan claim them. Suga also expressed Japan's concern about the situation in Hong Kong. Still, he and Wang pledged to work together to ensure next year's Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics and the 2022 Beijing Games are successful. The number of coronavirus infections in Tokyo continues to rise, with 401 new cases on Wednesday. The increase has compelled officials to ask bars and restaurants that serve alcohol to close by 10 p.m. beginning this weekend.
54 coronavirus patients in Tokyo are in serious condition as of today. The figure is rapidly increasing. We need to prevent death, prevent serious cases, and prevent the collapse of the medical system. Stricter measures are necessary now.
The request for establishments that serve alcohol to close early is expected to last for 20 days. Officials say businesses that comply will be entitled to subsidies. Tokyo officials are also planning to suspend a campaign that offers discounts on dining and are urging residents to refrain from non-essential outings. Pub owners hit hard by the pandemic are disappointed with the news. This is the third time since April that they've been asked to close early.
The last 2 times, I thought the measure was inevitable. But this time, I feel not again. They shouldn't just ask us to shorten our business hours, but rather take drastic steps to tackle the virus. Otherwise, this will happen again.
The measures come just one day after the central government temporarily excluded the cities of Sapporo and Osaka from a domestic tourism campaign aimed at stimulating the economy. Despite the spike in cases in Tokyo, it will stay in the campaign. There are more than 1,900 new cases reported nationwide on Wednesday. Over 130,000 people have tested positive since the outbreak began, with the death toll exceeding 2,000. Officials and experts met to discuss ways to curb the spread of the virus and to alleviate strain on medical workers. The experts called on local governments to try to reduce travel between places where infections are rapidly spreading and other areas. The minister in charge of the coronavirus response says unless strict measures are put in place immediately, it could take a heavy toll on the medical system during the New Year holidays, when the system is most vulnerable.
The next 3 weeks are a critical period. It will be the most important 3 weeks, which will decide whether we can contain the ongoing spread of infections.
The minister says if the virus continues to spread rapidly, officials may have to consider declaring a state of emergency once again. Turning now to the United States, where an expert panel at the Food and Drug Administration is set to meet to discuss plans to roll out a coronavirus vaccine. A senior health official says distribution could start within weeks. Alex Azar told reporters the panel will convene on December 10th to review an application for the emergency use of the vaccine. He said if approved by the FDA, the vaccine can be distributed nationwide within 24 hours.
We expect by the end of December to have enough vaccine to vaccinate those who are most vulnerable, just by way of sizing and scaling.
Authorities are aiming to provide 40 million doses by the end of this year. State officials will decide how the vaccine is distributed based on recommendations from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Recent weeks have seen encouraging results from late-stage trials of vaccine candidates. Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer applied to the FDA for authorization of its vaccine last Friday, while Moderna said it's also preparing an application. Hong Kong's chief executive has welcomed the new national security law imposed on the city by Beijing. Carrie Lam says the legislation has helped restore stability.
In the past year or so, Hong Kong has experienced the most severe political challenges since its return to the motherland. One of our urgent priorities is to restore Hong Kong's constitutional order and political system from chaos.
In her annual policy address, Lam said the government will introduce a bill to enhance oath-taking by civil servants. She was speaking in the absence of most pro-democracy lawmakers. Critics call the legislature nothing but a rubber stamp for Beijing's policy. The new security law introduced in late June has dealt a severe blow to a group of pro-democracy lawmakers. Earlier this month, more than a dozen of them resigned en masse after authorities disqualified 4 of their colleagues who'd been deemed a threat to national security. Unlike in past policy addresses, there were no pro-democracy banners to be seen nor shouting heard in the council. Turning to an ongoing scandal involving former Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, NHK has learned that staff at the former Prime Minister's office disposed of receipts from hotels where annual parties were held for supporters. This goes against Abe's repeated explanations in the Diet that all expenses for the parties were paid by participants. The dinner events in question took place on the eve of cherry blossom viewing parties during Abe's time in office. Japan's prime ministers have hosted such parties for decades. Receipts from the hotels suggest that between 2015 and 2019, Abe's office paid at least around $77,000 of the party's total costs. The receipts were issued to a fund management group that Abe headed. Lawyers and others have filed criminal complaints alleging Abe's office violated the political funds control law. Prosecutors are believed to have received receipts and statements from the hotels and to be investigating the matter in detail. Japan's defense ministry has released an interim report saying alternatives to the Aegis Ashore land-based missile defense system are estimated to be more expensive than the original plan. The ministry has been studying sea-based alternatives. The report estimates constructing 2 vessels and equipping them with the advanced Aegis radar system could cost more than $4.5 billion. These would offer the highest capability and mobility. Building them would take about 5 years, the same as Aegis Ashore. The original plan projected the cost of installing 2 Aegis Ashore units would be about $3.8 billion. The ministry also estimated the cost of other options, such as using private sector vessels or building structures similar to oil rigs. Otsu City in the western Japanese prefecture of Shiga has conducted seaplane test flights over scenic Lake Biwa with the aim of reviving such excursions after nearly half a century. Passengers who had reserved seats boarded the seaplane on Tuesday. The flights over the country's largest lake had operated until 1972. The sightseers enjoyed majestic aerial views of the countryside as well as the nearby ancient capital of Kyoto.
I enjoyed seeing the place where I live from a different perspective. It was amazing.
Otsu City officials say they'll continue to assess demand for the scenic flights in preparation for their full revival. Japanese telecom giant NTT East has announced a method of showing extremely accurate fine art reproductions at locations other than galleries. The high-resolution distribution system was conceived for people who love museums but find visiting them difficult, partly due to the coronavirus pandemic. NTT officials staged a display of the still and moving images ahead of their online distribution starting in December. They included Katsushika Hokusai's masterpiece series 36 Views of Mount Fuji, held by a museum in Yamanashi Prefecture near Tokyo. The famous woodblock prints were reproduced on monitors at a stunning resolution of 2 billion pixels.
We want to increase the opportunities for people to experience art in a range of places, not just cultural facilities.
NTT East plans to expand its business by working with museums as they struggle with a plunge in visitor numbers because of the virus outbreak.
It makes a lot of sense to replicate cultural properties with sophisticated technology and high-speed, high-data communications that's faithful to the values of the works.
NTT officials plan to showcase the works on monitors installed at locations including hospitals and nursing homes.